In today's video, I'm going to draft my own sewing pattern for a wrap top and then show you how I construct it. I did draft this pattern by hand on paper, however I've created a mock-up of my drafting on Illustrator so that it's clear for you to follow along. Starting from my basic bodice block, with all seam allowances removed, I first marked a 1-inch line up from the waist point on the front and back bodice. I then cut these sections out, closing the darts. Focusing on the bodice back, little changes. I'm going to cut everything on the fold, so I marked that onto my pattern for cutting and I labelled my 3 separate sections. I also smoothed the sharp corners out of the waist point. And on the back base, I rounded the bottom edge so it was 2 centimetres longer at the centre back and rounded the side. This was to give it a smoother shape. Moving to the front, I duplicated the front bodice in a mirror image at the centre front. This allows me to draw the overlap of the wrap section. I wanted the neckline high enough that it covered most of my cleavage, so I used a tape measure and measured from my neck to the point that felt comfortable, and I marked this on the centre front line. Next, I marked 2 centimetres in from the neckline. This I copied onto the back section. This is so it wasn't as high around my neck. Finally, I marked the point I wanted the overlap to end. For me, that was on the dart point, and I felt this was a good extension for the style lines I wanted to create. Now I want to draw a nice smooth line, touching these points as closely as I can. When you do this, you don't have to be bang on top of the points, adjust so it looks pleasing, but be aware of how it will translate on your body and if that is an acceptable change for you. If you prefer a higher neckline, try to prioritise hitting that middle point or above. So there is the front bodice, which I have now labelled up. Now we deal with below the waistband. My design has this swoop at the front edge, but the body is still covered below because of the overlap. I'm going to match the line from above and mark my start point. Then, using a nice pleasing line, I curved the corner. I tried not to go too high here while still creating the curved effect. I wanted the coverage. For the waistband, I joined bodice front and bodice base, then smoothed the sharp lines from removing the darts like I had on the back. For all front pieces, I needed to cut too, so I labelled everything up here and ensured I had all notches marked. My sleeve is a simple draft. First, I measured my arm to get the length as I wanted. Then I split the sleeve up in 6 vertical sections. I cut along these lines up to the top edge, leaving a small hinge, and spread them by 5 centimetres. I did this for every single gap. Placing paper behind, I filled in the gaps and drew a new smooth curve on the bottom edge. For the 2 ties, I drafted a rectangle 4 centimetres wide and 80 centimetres long. I'll cut 4 of these to create the 2 ties. As with any pattern draft, the final step is to go back and measure all seams to check the lengths matches. Dart placements align, everything is labelled correctly, and cutting instructions are on. I also recommend giving your pattern a name at this point so afterwards you can store it without losing track. Once you have that finalised, go in and add your seam allowance all the way round. I use 1.5 centimetre, but you can work with what you prefer. When pattern drafting, get into the habit of making a toile to really nail the fit and construction techniques. Once I cut my toile on some cheap fabric, did a rough sew up, I had gaping at my neckline. To correct my pattern, I removed 2 centimetres from the front edge of the neckline, transferring it into my waist dart. I also added a little more volume into the back base section as I wanted more ease. I toiled the changes and checked I was happy with the fit and proceeded to my final fabrics. For fabrics, I am using 100% cotton with a linen look in a lovely summery sweet clementines print from Stitch Fabrics. It's 140 centimetres wide and I'll add links below. Then to line the fabric, I am using a 100% plain white cotton. The fabric is almost opaque, but I prefer lined garments to facings. Before I began, I pre-washed all my materials and pressed them. The print on this fabric is busy, so I didn't bother pattern matching, but I did keep all my pieces one way up. I think you would probably get away with using both directions on this, but I had the room, so I just kept it safe. This cotton cut really nice and it was easy to control. I cut the majority on the fold, but a few parts, such as the waistband, I cut from the scraps afterwards, simply because at this point I was still overthinking if I wanted to try and make my straps a continuous band from my waist. I didn't in the end, but that's the reason there is a few pieces uncut at this stage, my own indecision. Once cut, I go through all sections and mark notches. I then mark any darts and pin the darts ready for sewing. My last video takes you through how to mark and sew professional darts, and I'll link it below in the description if you wish to check that out. I do find that doing all my pinning in one go like this, for as much as I can, saves so much time during my makes instead of going back and forth from the machine. It's also really satisfying to work through a pile of sewing like this. I haven't shown it here, but once I did this, I repeated the entire process for the lining fabric. For this project, the lining and the main fabric are treated in the same manner till they are joined together. I pressed all the darts and then began on the construction of the bodice, joining it at the shoulder points and the underarm seam. I notice here I'd not trued my seams after adjusting the neckline to stop the gaping. I trimmed the back down to match the front, but this was an error on my part. The sleeves had a gathering stitch entered at the sleeve head, and then they were inserted into the bodice, aligning the underarm seam and the notches. I chose to leave the sleeves unlined. Next, I made the straps. To do this, I placed 2 of the rectangles together and sewed around the exterior of 3 sides. On the end, I created a point so it looked prettier. I used pinking shears to trim the seam allowances and turned it the right sides out and gave it a press. Then, I top stitched the edge at the 1/8 inch point in white thread. The straps will be a lot stronger like this than just pressed. The waistband was constructed with the tie on one side seam sandwiched between front and back. I went back in and used a zigzag stitch in the seam allowance to make it strong and secure. I then pinned my waistband to my bodice, aligning all my seams and my notches with darts. When I sewed this down, I made sure not to catch the tie in the stitches. You'll also be pleased to know I cut away the excess after sewing this, as I finally made a decision on my tie. I agonised over this for some time before finally committing. Next, I inserted the matching lining right sides together to the main fabric bodice. I pinned along the neckline, down each front edge and the waistband, matching each and every seam. I also inserted the second tie I had made at the waistband front edge. I sewed this down, gave the tie the same zigzag treatment in the seam allowance, and then understitched all the way round. Understitching is how you keep your lining on the inside of your garment and stop it poking out. For the base section, I constructed the lining and the main fabric separately. I pinned them right sides together and sewed around the bottom edge, leaving the top edge open. I top stitched the hem at 1/4 inch for a neat polished trim. Then I inserted this into the waistband edge and sewed it to the main fabric only. finish, I hand stitched the waistband and the sleeve lining to make it neat internally. I also did a rolled hem on the sleeves. Here is my finished design, a wrap top with waist ties and high neckline, some ruffled short sleeves. It reaches to my hips comfortably with plenty of ease, so I can easily bend over without worrying, with just lots of easy movement. Fully lined and really comfortable. If you have enjoyed watching and would like to see more, please like and subscribe to stay notified of new videos and techniques. My name is Elfie Sew and I create sewing tutorials for all abilities looking to learn, along with sewing alongs and pattern drafting inspiration like today for enthusiasts. Happy sewing!